Hi, welcome to Dust History. In the annals of Renaissance history, few names evoke as much scandal, intrigue, and fascination as that of Lucrezia Borgia. The very mention of her name conjures tales of poison, political machinations, and sexual scandal. But perhaps the most shocking story associated with her is the one whispered about her wedding night. A night so scandalous that it would echo through the centuries, cementing her reputation as one of history's most notorious women. It was said that on her wedding night, young Lucrezia consummated her marriage not once, not twice, but 3 times, with 3 different men. How could such a thing happen? And what truth lies behind this tantalizing piece of historical gossip? To understand this scandal, we must transport ourselves to Rome in the year 1493. The Renaissance was in full swing, a time of artistic brilliance, scientific discovery, and religious upheaval. But it was also a time of political intrigue, where power was brokered through strategic marriages, alliances, and sometimes murder. At the center of this world stood the Borgia family, led by the newly elected Pope Alexander VI, formerly Rodrigo Borgia. The Borgias were Spanish by origin, but had risen to prominence in Italy through a combination of political acumen, wealth, and an utter lack of scruples. Rodrigo Borgia had purchased the papacy through simony and now sought to secure his family's power through strategic marriages of his children. Lucrezia Borgia, at just 13 years old, was his most valuable pawn. Beautiful, educated, and poised, she was the perfect instrument for her father's political ambitions. The Pope had arranged a marriage between Lucrezia and Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro and a member of the powerful Sforza family of Milan. The marriage would create an alliance between the Borgias and the Sforzas, strengthening the Pope's position in Italian politics. The wedding was a lavish affair, befitting the daughter of the Pope, held at the Vatican Palace. Guests included cardinals, nobles, and dignitaries from across Italy and beyond. The young bride, resplendent in a gown of gold brocade, was paraded before the assembled guests, a symbol of the Borgias' rising power. But beneath the surface of this magnificent celebration, dark currents were already flowing. Giovanni Sforza was 26 years old to Lucrezia's 13, a significant age gap even for those times. He was also known to be cruel and volatile. Lucrezia, though young, was said to be terrified of her new husband. Yet she played her part, smiling demurely for the guests, her eyes betraying none of the fear she must have felt. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, watched with satisfaction as his plans unfolded. Her brother Cesare, recently made a cardinal at just 18, observed with his characteristic intensity, already plotting his next move. The wedding feast lasted for days, with endless courses, entertainment, and celebrations. But as the festivities wound down, attention turned to what was expected to happen next, the consummation of the marriage. As the wedding night approached, guests began to place bets on whether the young bride would be able to fulfill her marital duties. Some whispered that she was too young, too innocent. Others speculated that her husband would be too drunk to perform. But no one could have predicted what would actually happen that night, or the scandal that would emerge from the bridal chamber. The morning after, rumors began to circulate among the Vatican courtiers. Strange sounds had been heard from the bridal chamber. Multiple men had been seen entering and leaving, and most shockingly of all, it was said that the marriage had been consummated not once, but 3 times, with 3 different partners. How could all this be possible? Who were these mysterious men? And what role did Lucrezia's own family play in this scandalous affair? The truth, as it often is with the Borgias, is more complex than the rumors suggest. Historical records indicate that there was indeed something unusual about Lucrezia's wedding night. According to some accounts, the young bride was so terrified of her much older husband that she refused to be alone with him. In response, her brother Cesare and their father, the Pope, devised a shocking solution. They brought in a stand-in, a handsome young courtier named Pedro Calderon, to consummate the marriage in Giovanni's place. But this was only the beginning of the night's strange events. Later, Giovanni himself entered the chamber and consummated the marriage with his young bride. And then, in a final twist, Cesare himself was said to have visited Lucrezia, completing the trio of lovers in a single night. Whether these events actually happened as described is impossible to know for certain. What is clear is that from the very beginning of her married life, Lucrezia was not in control of her own body or destiny. Looking back on this scandalous wedding night, we must question the narrative that has been passed down through history. Lucrezia Borgia has been portrayed as a femme fatale, a poisoner, a sexually voracious woman who participated in incestuous relationships with her father and brother. But what if the truth is far more tragic? What if she was simply a young girl, caught in the web of her family's ambitions, used as a political pawn and subjected to violations that would traumatize anyone, let alone a 13-year-old child? The story of Lucrezia's wedding night reveals much about the position of women in Renaissance Italy, valued for their utility in forming alliances, but denied agency over their own bodies and lives. As we delve deeper into Lucrezia's story, we must peel back the layers of myth and scandal to uncover the human being beneath, and ask ourselves, who was the real Lucrezia Borgia, and what price did she pay for her family's relentless pursuit of power? The morning after the wedding dawned over Rome, but the air in the Vatican palace was thick not just with the residue of feasting, but with a volatile cocktail of shock, scandal, and simmering rage. The whispers that had begun as drunken speculation among courtiers had hardened into a dangerous rumor, spreading like wildfire through the corridors of power. Lucrezia Borgia, the Pope's own daughter, had been shared between three men on her wedding night. Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro, awoke not as a triumphant bridegroom, but as a figure of profound humiliation. Whether he had been too drunk to perform, too repulsive to his terrified child bride, or simply deliberately replaced by the Borgias, the message was brutally clear. He was merely a placeholder, a tool for Borgia ambition, and his marital rights, his very manhood, had been callously disregarded by the most powerful family in Christendom. The context of this humiliation was crucial. Renaissance Italy was a snake pit of rival city-states and powerful families, the Sforzas of Milan, the Medicis of Florence, the Aragonese of Naples, the Venetian Republic, and now, the Borgias controlling the papacy. Alliances were fleeting, forged and broken with breathtaking speed, often sealed by marriages that treated women like commodities. Giovanni Sforza, while a minor lord compared to his Milanese cousins, was still a Sforza. His family commanded respect and military power. To be publicly cuckolded, especially on his wedding night, by the Pope himself and his ambitious son Cesare, was not just a personal insult, it was a political declaration. It signaled that the Borgias considered the Sforza alliance expendable, or perhaps even a temporary inconvenience. The lavish wedding, the Pope's blessing, all of it now seemed like a grotesque charade designed to trap Giovanni in a marriage that the Borgias intended to shatter at the earliest convenience. The story of the immediate aftermath is a masterclass in Borgia ruthlessness and the precariousness of Lucrezia's position. Giovanni, furious and deeply suspicious, confronted Lucrezia and demanded to know the truth of the previous night. The terrified 13-year-old, caught between her vengeful husband and her terrifyingly powerful family, likely offered little clarity. Giovanni's rage, however, was not confined to his bride. He openly accused Cesare Borgia of orchestrating the humiliation and, more explosively, hinted at an unnatural relationship between the brother and sister. These accusations were dangerous dynamite. Cesare, recently made a cardinal despite his youth and known military ambitions, was not a man to cross. The Pope, Rodrigo Borgia, initially tried to smooth things over, perhaps hoping to salvage the alliance for a while longer. But the damage was done. Giovanni Sforza knew he was despised and distrusted by his in-laws. He began to fear for his life, a not unreasonable fear given the Borgia reputation for eliminating obstacles. The Borgias, meanwhile, moved swiftly and decisively, They needed to neutralize Giovanni and, more importantly, erase the living proof of their treachery. Pedro Calderón, the handsome young courtier who had stood in for Giovanni. Calderón, who had enjoyed a brief, dangerous intimacy with Lucrezia and the favor of the Borgias, suddenly found his position untenable. His presence was a constant reminder of the scandal. Within weeks, Calderón's body was found floating in the Tiber River, his throat slit. The official explanation was a robbery gone wrong, but no one in Rome doubted who had ordered the murder. It was a chilling message. Witnesses to Borgia secrets did not live long. Giovanni, seeing Calderón's fate, fled Rome in terror, returning to Pesaro. He knew he had to escape the Borgias' reach entirely. Lucrezia, caught in the eye of this storm, was effectively imprisoned. Removed from her husband's household, she was sequestered in the convent of San Sisto, ostensibly for her safety and spiritual edification. In reality, she was under guard, isolated from the outside world and completely under the control of her father and brother. The vibrant, educated girl who had been paraded as a bride was now a political prisoner. Her value as a pawn temporarily diminished while her family plotted their next move. The scandal of her wedding night had served its purpose. It had destroyed the Sforza alliance and provided the pretext for annulment. But what would become of Lucrezia? And what new, even more dangerous game were the Borgias preparing to play with her life? The annulment proceedings were about to begin, promising a fresh wave of scandal that would make the rumors of the triple consummation seem like mere prelude. What shocking evidence would the Borgias produce to dissolve the marriage, and what role would Lucrezia be forced to play in her own public humiliation? The revelation of Pedro Calderón's murder underscores the brutal reality behind the Borgia legend. They were not merely schemers. They were killers who eliminated anyone who threatened their secrets or their power. Lucrezia, despite her youth and status, was not immune to their machinations. Her seclusion in the convent was not protection, it was control. She was being groomed for her next role, her reputation already irrevocably tarnished by the events of her wedding night and the subsequent murder of her alleged lover. This period reveals the terrifying speed with which the Borgias operated and the utter disposability of human life, even that of those closest to them, in their relentless pursuit of power. Lucrezia was learning a harsh lesson. In the Borgia court, loyalty was fleeting, trust was fatal, and her own body and destiny were merely assets to be traded or discarded as her father and brother saw fit. The scandal was far from over. It was merely entering its next, more devastating phase. The annulment proceedings began not in the hushed confines of a Vatican chamber, but with the explosive force of a political bombshell detonated across Christendom. Giovanni Sforza, safe in Pesaro, but still seething with rage and fear, received the official notification. The Borgias were seeking to dissolve his marriage to Lucrezia on the grounds of non-consummation. The sheer audacity of the claim, coming mere months after the scandalous wedding night rumors, was breathtaking. It was a public declaration that Giovanni Sforza was impotent, a direct assault on his honor, his virility, and his very standing as a nobleman. The message was unmistakable. The Borgias were not just ending the alliance. They were systematically destroying the man who had dared to be their inconvenient pawn. The stage was set for one of the most sordid and publicly humiliating legal battles of the Renaissance. To understand the significance of this charge, we must delve into the intricate and often hypocritical world of Renaissance canon law and marriage politics. Annulment, declaring a marriage null and void as if it never existed, was the preferred method for dissolving high-profile unions. Unlike divorce, it left both parties free to remarry within the church and avoided the stain of illegitimacy for any children. Grounds for annulment were notoriously flexible for the powerful, ranging from pre-existing contracts, consanguinity, to, as in this case, impotentia coeundi, the inability to perform the sexual act. Proving impotence was notoriously difficult and deeply embarrassing, often requiring humiliating examinations and testimonies. For the Borgias, however, this was the perfect weapon. By claiming the marriage was never consummated, they could retroactively erase the scandal of the triple consummation and simultaneously destroy Giovanni's reputation. It was a masterstroke of vicious pontant, political theater. The proceedings themselves became a grotesque spectacle, orchestrated with chilling precision by Pope Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia. Giovanni naturally fought back furiously. He denied the charge vehemently, countering with the explosive rumors of the wedding night, the presence of Pedro Calderón, the alleged involvement of Cesare, the very fact that Lucrezia had been seen entering his chambers. He demanded that Lucrezia herself be examined to prove her virginity, a shocking demand that placed the young girl directly in the line of fire. The Borgias, however, held all the cards. They controlled the Vatican court, the judges, and, most crucially, Lucrezia herself. She was brought from her convent confinement, not as a willing participant, but as a terrified witness coerced into testifying against her own husband. Historical accounts suggest she was pressured, possibly threatened, into confirming the official Borgia line, that Giovanni had been unable to perform his marital duties, that the marriage remained unconsummated. Her testimony, delivered under duress and likely scripted by her father and brother, was the devastating centerpiece of their case. The humiliation reached its zenith when Giovanni, in a desperate attempt to salvage his honor, agreed to submit to a physical examination, a public inspection of his manhood by a panel of doctors and clerics. The details are murky and deeply uncomfortable, but the outcome was inevitable. Under the immense pressure exerted by the papal court, and likely influenced by bribes or threats, the examiners declared Giovanni Sforza impotent. It was a verdict delivered not by medical fact, but by political fiat. Giovanni was officially declared incapable of consummating a marriage. The annulment was granted in December 1497. Giovanni Sforza was not just divorced. He was publicly branded as less than a man. His political and social standing in ruins. He retreated to Pesaro, a broken and embittered figure, forever marked by the Borgia vendetta. But the scandal didn't end with the annulment decree. The very process, designed to erase the wedding night rumors, instead amplified them tenfold. If the marriage was truly unconsummated, why the frantic whispers about Calderón? Why Giovanni's furious accusations against Cesare? Why Lucrezia's terrified seclusion immediately after the wedding? The official story felt hollow, a transparent fabrication masking a darker truth. The court of Europe buzzed with speculation. The Sforza family, though Giovanni's Milanese cousins had initially supported the marriage, were now deeply offended by the public shaming of one of their own. The annulment, far from resolving the situation, had created a new wave of outrage and suspicion against the Borgias. Lucrezia, once again, was the focal point. Her coerced testimony, her role in the destruction of her husband, painted her in the darkest light imaginable, a willing participant in her family's schemes, a girl who would lie under oath to please her father and brother. The revelation lies in the cold calculus of power. The annulment was never about truth or justice. It was a meticulously planned act of character assassination and political maneuvering. The Borgias needed Giovanni out of the way, permanently discredited, so Lucrezia could be remarried to a more advantageous partner. The charge of impotence was simply the most effective and most humiliating tool available. Lucrezia's testimony, extracted under duress, was a necessary sacrifice. Her reputation, already tarnished, was now irrevocably linked to deceit and the destruction of her husband. The annulment succeeded legally, but it was a Pyrrhic victory that deepened the Borgia infamy and left Lucrezia more isolated than ever. What new, even more dangerous marriage alliance did Rodrigo and Cesare have in mind for their now available sister? And what fresh horrors await? Lucrezia, as she was paraded once more onto the marriage market, her value as a pawn undiminished, despite the scandals that clung to her like a shroud. The annulment was over, but the next chapter of Lucrezia's tragic story was about to begin. The ink was barely dry on the annulment decree when Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI began casting his net for the next husband for his daughter. Lucrezia, barely 15, was already a seasoned veteran of marital politics, her reputation a complex tapestry woven with threads of scandal, victimhood, and alleged complicity. The annulment, while legally successful, had left her dangerously exposed. To the outside world, she was either a terrified child manipulated by monstrous men or a deceitful participant in her family's schemes. To her father and brother, however, she remained their most valuable asset, a key to unlocking new alliances and consolidating power. The Sforza alliance lay in ruins, a testament to Borgia ruthlessness. Now, Rodrigo set his sights on a rival power center, the Kingdom of Naples, ruled by the formidable House of Aragon. The chosen groom was Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bisceglie, and nephew of King Alfonso II of Naples. He was 17, handsome, and, crucially, connected to a powerful enemy the Borgias now sought to appease, or perhaps, to eventually dominate. The context of this new match was fraught with tension. The Borgias and the Aragonese Neapolitans had been bitter rivals. Cesare Borgia, having abandoned his cardinal's hat for a military career and the title Duke of Valentinois, harbored ambitions in the Romagna, lands contested by Naples. Marrying Lucrezia to Alfonso was a temporary truce, a way to secure the Papal States' southern flank, while Cesare pursued his northern conquests. For Alfonso, it was a perilous step into the viper's pit of Vatican politics. He was entering a family known for destroying those who outlived their usefulness. For Lucrezia, it was another terrifying transition. Removed from the convent, she was once again dressed in finery, paraded as a bride, and expected to play her part. Historical accounts suggest he developed genuine affection for Alfonso. He was closer to her age, reportedly kind, and offered a fleeting glimpse of normalcy, perhaps even love, in her chaotic existence. They were married in July 1498, a much quieter affair than her first wedding, but the shadow of the past loomed large. The story of Lucrezia's second marriage is inextricably entangled with the toxic presence of her brother Cesare. Their relationship has fueled centuries of speculation, ranging from intense sibling loyalty to accusations of incestuous passion. While concrete proof of the latter is elusive, the historical record paints a picture of a disturbingly possessive and volatile dynamic. Cesare, consumed by his military campaigns and his own ruthless ambition, seemed to view Lucrezia's personal happiness, especially with a Neapolitan prince, as a potential threat or an unwelcome distraction. He resented Alfonso's presence, his influence over Lucrezia, and the very alliance he represented. As Cesare's power grew, fueled by French support and his own terrifying efficiency on the battlefield, his tolerance for the Neapolitan connection dwindled. Alfonso, sensing the danger, grew increasingly fearful and paranoid. He reportedly slept armed and avoided Cesare whenever possible. Lucrezia, caught between her husband's fear and her brother's unpredictable rage, was trapped once more. The scandal that erupted during this marriage was not whispered. It was screamed in blood. In the evening of July 15, 1500, as Lucrezia was recovering from the birth of her child, named Rodrigo after her father, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. He was stabbed multiple times by a group of armed men, including Cesare's own captain, Micheletto Corella. Though grievously wounded, Alfonso survived the initial assault, thanks partly to Lucrezia's frantic intervention. She had him carried to her chambers within the Vatican, nursing him personally, surrounding him with her own guards, and desperately trying to protect him from the man she knew was responsible, her brother. For weeks, a tense standoff ensued. Lucrezia tended to her wounded husband, while Cesare seethed outside, prevented by a sister's vigil from finishing the job. The Vatican became a prison, the air thick with fear and the metallic scent of impending violence. Lucrezia's affection for Alfonso was now a direct challenge to Cesare's authority and a dangerous obstacle to his political plans. The revelation of Cesare's role in the attack was an open secret. No one doubted who had ordered the assassination attempt. The motive was clear. Cesare needed to break the Neapolitan alliance, which was hindering his ambitions in Romagna, and Alfonso stood in the way. The attack was a brutal declaration of his power and his willingness to eliminate even family ties that no longer served him. Lucrezia's desperate efforts to save her husband were a poignant, futile act of defiance against her brother's tyranny. She was using the remnants of her influence, her position as the Pope's beloved daughter, to shield the man she loved. But Cesare's patience was finite. He bided his time, waiting for his moment. The scene was set for a final, horrifying act of violence that would shatter Lucrezia's world and forever stain the Borgia name. How could Cesare possibly reach Alfonso now, deep within the Vatican, under Lucrezia's protection? And what unspeakable act would finally break the standoff? This period lays bare the terrifying reality of Lucrezia's existence. Even moments of apparent happiness, like her marriage to Alfonso and the birth of her child, were fragile illusions, constantly under threat from the machinations of her own family. Her body, once used to create a scandalous wedding night, was now the site of childbirth and desperate nursing. Her chambers, meant to be a sanctuary, became a battlefield where she fought a losing battle to save her husband. Cesare's attack on Alfonso wasn't just political, it was deeply personal, a violation of the sister he professed to love. It demonstrated the absolute primacy of his ambition over any familial bond. Lucrezia's power, derived solely from her father and brother, was ultimately useless when it came to protecting those she cared about. She could arrange feasts, wear jewels, and play the Duchess, but she could not stop the blade aimed at her husband's heart. The question wasn't if Cesare would strike again, but when and how. The Vatican walls, designed to protect the Pope, were about to witness a murder that would resonate through history. The Vatican in the sweltering summer of 1500 was no longer a sanctuary, it was a gilded cage vibrating with murderous intent. Lucrezia Borgia, barely 21, moved like a ghost through its opulent halls, her face etched with exhaustion and terror. Within her chambers, Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bisilie, lay recovering from the brutal knife attack that had nearly claimed his life weeks earlier. Lucrezia tended to him relentlessly, a fierce, desperate guardian. She had stationed her own loyal guards at the door, defying her brother Cesare's unspoken command. Yet, every creak in the corridor, every distant footstep, sent a fresh wave of dread through her. She knew Cesare hadn't abandoned his purpose. The attack on the basilica steps was merely the opening salvo. Her husband's survival was an affront to Cesare's will, a temporary obstacle in his relentless pursuit of power. The question wasn't if he would come for Alfonso again, but when and how he would breach her fragile defenses. The air itself felt thick, charged with the promise of inevitable violence. The context of this final horrifying act was the culmination of Cesare Borgia's meteoric and terrifying rise. Having cast off the cardinal's red for the duke's black armor, he was now Il Valentino, the terror of Italy, carving out a principality in the Romagna with French backing and ruthless efficiency. His alliance with Naples, symbolized by Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso, had become a liability. King Frederick of Naples was wavering, aligning against Cesare's French allies. Alfonso, as the king's nephew, represented that unwanted connection. More personally, Cesare seemed to possess a twisted, proprietary fury towards Lucrezia's affection for another man. Her devotion to Alfonso was a challenge to his absolute control over his family. While Pope Alexander VI, Lucrezia's father, ostensibly mourned his son in law's condition and sought peace, historians widely believe he tacitly approved, or at least did nothing to prevent, Cesare's final solution. The Borgia machine, once set in motion, crushed all in its path, even the happiness of its own. The story of Alfonso's final hours unfolds with the chilling inevitability of Greek tragedy. On the night of August 18, 1500, as Lucrezia rested briefly, Cesare struck. He didn't send a mob this time. He sent his most trusted and brutal lieutenant, the Spanish assassin Micheletto Corella, the same man who had led the attack on the basilica steps. Micheletto, accompanied by a few hardened men, overpowered or bribed Lucrezia's guards. They slipped into the sick room where Alfonso lay vulnerable. According to most accounts, Micheletto himself strangled the young duke. Some versions suggest he was first stabbed, others that he was smothered. The exact method is lost to time, but the result was horrifyingly clear. Alfonso of Aragon was murdered in his bed within the Vatican, under the nose of the Pope, while his wife slept nearby. The killers vanished as silently as they came. The discovery the next morning was a scene of unimaginable horror. Lucrezia's screams of anguish echoed through the apostolic palace, a raw, primal sound that pierced the heart of Borgia power. Her husband, the man she had loved and desperately tried to protect, was gone, butchered on the orders of her own brother. The revelation of this monstrous act was absolute. There was no pretense, no plausible deniability. Everyone in Rome, in all the courts of Europe, knew Cesare Borgia had murdered his sister's husband within the Pope's own residence. It was an act of such staggering audacity and brutality that it transcended even the Borgia's notorious reputation. It demonstrated the terrifying extent of Cesare's power, that he could commit such a crime in the heart of Christendom and face no consequences. For Lucrezia, it was the ultimate, soul-shattering revelation of her powerlessness. Her status as the Pope's daughter, the Duchess of Bisceglie, meant nothing against Cesare's will. Her love, her courage, her desperate attempts to shield Alfonso were utterly futile. She was a pawn who had dared to feel, and the game had punished her with the most exquisite cruelty. The murder stripped bare the terrifying reality of her existence. Her life, her loves, her very body were entirely subject to the monstrous ambitions of her family. She was surrounded by gilded walls, but utterly alone in her grief and terror. In the aftermath, Lucrezia retreated once more, shattered. But the Borgia machine, as ever, demanded she play her part. Within months, Rodrigo Borgia was arranging her third marriage. This time, the groom was Alfonso Giudice, heir to the powerful Duchy of Ferrara. The match was crucial, securing a vital northern alliance for Cesare's campaigns. Lucrezia, still grieving, still traumatized, was dispatched to Ferrara in 1502. There, against all odds, she began a remarkable transformation. Freed from the suffocating, toxic embrace of her father and brother, she flourished. As Duchess of Ferrara, she became a respected and effective ruler, a renowned patron of the arts and literature, counting poets like Ariosto and Bembo among her friends, a loving mother to several children, and a woman known for her intelligence, piety, and administrative skill. The scandals of her youth faded, replaced by a legacy of competence and grace. She died in Ferrara in 1519 at the age of 39, mourned by her adopted city. The reflection on Lucrezia Borgia's life, particularly centered around the scandals of her wedding and marriages, forces us to confront the chasm between historical myth and human reality. The story of the triple consummation, the annulment, the murder of Alfonso, these are not merely salacious tales. They are stark indictments of a world where women were currency and power was purchased with blood and betrayal. Lucrezia was neither the monstrous poisoner of legend nor a passive victim. She was a survivor, navigating a labyrinth of terror and ambition with remarkable resilience. The scandal of her wedding night wasn't just about sexual transgression. It was about the violent assertion of control over a young girl's body and destiny. The murder of Alfonso wasn't just fratricide. It was the ultimate demonstration that in the Borgia calculus, human life, even love, was expendable. Lucrezia's later life in Ferrara suggests the woman she might have always been, had she not been born a Borgia daughter. Her story compels us to question the narratives handed down by history, often written by her enemies or scandal-mongers. Who was the real Lucrezia? Perhaps she was a woman who endured unimaginable trauma, witnessed unspeakable horrors, and yet, in the end, managed to carve out a space for herself where she could be more than a pawn. Her legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of scandal, sorrow, survival, and ultimately, a quiet triumph of the human spirit over the suffocating weight of an infamous name. The most scandalous wedding night was merely the first act in a life defined by the brutal collision of love, power, and the relentless a chinery of Renaissance ambition. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.